Welcome back to r/Neighbors from Hell, where people share stories about their crazy neighbors. And if you are new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our amazing community. And without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And guys, today's stories will be from r/AskReddit, so they might be a little bit different, but I think they are very funny. Anyway, the first one goes like this. This is more of a funny story than a neighbor from hell, but in our apartment we kept hearing massive bass, think like a rhythm game, starting at like 6 PM to sometimes going till 11 PM, and it sounded like it was localized right above our bedroom. Finally, one night I go up and bang on the door, but they don't answer. About an hour later I hear moving around in the apartment above me, so I walk out hoping to catch them either on the stairs or so I can knock on the door again. I go out and he is walking down the stairs. When he sees me, he asks if I can turn down the bass so he can sleep. It was like the Spider-Man meme where they are pointing at each other. I told him I thought it was him this entire time. So after we realized it was neither of us, we walked together and found the noise coming from a building 2 buildings down, and it turned out the dude had a drum set in his closet and was rocking out every night. Since we talk to him we can hear it, but he always stops around 8 PM now, so it could have been way worse if the guy was a dick. And the next story goes like this. Our neighbor kept complaining that the plants by the shared fence in our garden were dragging it down and ruining the plants climbing on her side. You only had to glance at the fence to see that it was massively weighed down on her side. It was sort of a wire fence and it was stretched and bowed on her side so that it practically touched the ground. We had a few plants against the fence on our side, but nothing like she did, and yet she kept insisting it must be our fault. When we moved out, we hired a couple of gardeners to just tidy the garden up a bit for the next tenants. We left them to it and went inside to pack. When we checked on them later, we found that the neighbor had come in and told them to get rid of all of our plants by the fence, which technically belonged to the landlord. And instead of coming to check with us, they just totally ripped out every flower bed along the fence on the say-so of some random stranger. And of course, it made no damn difference to the fence whatsoever. And the next one, I had a neighbor with a work truck, custom truck and a custom car. We had so many vehicles that it was hard to park. When our second son was born, a 4th truck appeared. He rebuilt the thing. His yard was full of body panels instead of grass that summer. He was always using a metal grinder. He rebuilt the engine and took months to tune it. He would back it up to as close to our house as he could and would rev the engine. Before work, after work and all day on the weekends, it was impossible to have conversations in our house. He would stop if we left. He would start things like this, create conflict and would act like the victim. I witness he yells at cable installers, the landlord's brother who repainted the house. We were at odds because my cat went into his yard the summer before. So after pretending it wasn't getting to me, I called the cops who blew it off and told him he couldn't do it after sundown. Sundown doesn't happen until 10 PM in Montana. I finally emailed the community resource officer and he shut that down. For the next 2 years the guy would film me doing something wrong. He had 6 cameras pointing out from his place to ours at all angles. If I was taking out the trash, he would come out with his phone camera and try to catch me doing something. I don't know. Eventually his landlord evicted him. He still lives close and spent his summer evenings holding up a sign that said, "Screw your masks, liberals are dumb." I don't know what it means, but he wore a mask every time he went to the store. And the next one, growing up, the neighbor on one side would shoot the stray barn cats for fun. Broke my heart to find that one out. The other side was a cornfield for years owned by a guy out of state that paid local farmers to plant and harvest. Then that property got sold and was bought by a family that ran a landscaping business. They would burn green branches a lot, but only when the wind was blowing directly towards our house. We kept track. We lived in the country, but although our properties were quite long, they were not particularly wide. So their house was relatively close to ours and a ton of smoke would come in all the time. My dad started having serious respiratory problems due to all of the smoke, and the dad/business owner would just ignore us or say he didn't care when we asked nicely for him to stop. Finally, my parents went to a lawyer and got a letter that basically said, "You've got to stop or we will sue you for medical bills." My mom went to deliver the letter, and it just so happened that the guy's father-in-law was there too. He asked my mom what this was all about, and my mom told him. Father-in-law ripped the neighbor a new a-hole right then and there, apologized on his dopey sister-in-law's behalf, and with a very stern look at our neighbor, assured us it would never happen again. And it actually did not happen again, and my dad recovered once he was not breathing smoke in all the time. My parents and that neighbor both still live there. They are friendly with him now, but I just can't forgive being that blaze about making my dad seriously ill. And guys, the next one goes like this. There was an old guy behind named Louis. He was a cranky old fart and had fights with every neighbor. His house's lot was the last on the street, and the crossroad where I lived had 4 lots back to his side. So he had 6 lots adjacent to him, and he fought with them all. When I first moved there, I tried to get along. I had been warned. I planted a garden and he oversprayed weed killer over a lot of my plants, including several nice watermelon plants. He would yell at me, he would yell at my dog. My wife said he was saying obscene stuff to her. One day he called me a fat hillbilly without a pot to piss in. I called him a stupid old Goomba. He was Italian and he acted like I really hurt his feelings. This went on for years and he was keeping neighbors agitated as well. Here is the good part. One day I was at a flea market type thing and I saw him in his little accessibility cart. I tried to stay away. Suddenly from behind me I heard him say,
"Hey, aren't you the guy that lives behind me?"
I said yeah, and he popped out hand to shake and said,
"How you doing?"
And we talked. He was friendly. He told me his wife had a stroke recently and invited me over. I was wondering what was going on. That summer he saw me and came out to talk and we chatted. I mentioned I played guitar and he jumped and said go get it and I will bring the wife to the kitchen and you can play for her. I was stunned. I was shy about playing, but I brought it over and they thought it was wonderful. One day he apologized for being cranky before. I apologized back. Louis and I were friends the next few years. He would tell me stories of neighbors when he was a kid in the 1920s. Just became a good guy. None of the neighbors forgave him, but I did. I assumed his doctor gave him Prozac or something. Anyway, he died on September 10th, 2001, the day before the infamy. He was a diabetic and took nitroglycerin for his heart. Neighbors said he ended his own life, but I knew another guy that couldn't get his nitro on time and died. I think he had a medical emergency and could not make the call. About a year before he died, he asked me that if something happened to him to check the door on his lawn shed and make sure it was locked. I checked it, it was locked. Question? What was in the shack? OP's answer, just a lawn tractor and lawn stuff. In that neighborhood, if you left anything unlocked, stuff went missing. He was just worried about his tractor. And the next one goes like this. Our first house was in a working class post-WW2 suburban neighborhood. The houses were a single driveways with plus about 2 to 3 feet apart open yards. We moved in early spring with our then 2-year-old, so we were spending time outside when our new neighbors in their 70s came home. We smiled, waved, they came over to introduce themselves, and the first thing the lady says is,
"I have something to say to you people. Don't blow the snow up against our house. If I get water in our basement, we will sue the crap out of you."
Okay, nice to meet you too. This was the beginning of the most ridiculous neighbor relationship I think I've ever had. I nannied another little boy and she would come knock on our door and tell me to
"Shut those damn kids up before I call CPS on you."
They were running around my house that I owned, or the yard, being happy loud kids. Eventually I had enough and I ended up calling the non-emergency line for harassment, and then things got really weird. She would wake up at like 7 AM and bang on all the windows that faced our house. She would open them and bang them shut repeatedly. She would pound her fists on them. Then at about 7:30 or 8 she would walk out to her car after slamming the door and shake her keys as loud as she could. She would throw them on the ground, pick them up and shake them, throw them down again, and then she would leave for the morning. She would also randomly come wandering over, trying to give me $1 for my son's birthday, or tearful and wanting to come into our house. I wonder if she wasn't entering into some form of dementia. They sold their house about a year after we moved in. And the next one is a special little neighbor HOA story, and it is titled "It is the Great Pumpkin, Vindictive HOA President." I have told a shorter version of this story in the comments, but it is probably worth its own post so we can all hate on HOAs some more. I babysat and elder sat for the neighbors down the street who committed this malicious compliance, so I was there to hear the ranting as this whole mess went down. We will call my neighbors Liz and Dave. They were nice folks who ran afoul of the Homeowners Association HOA when the busybody president who lived next door to them, we will call her Joan, got it in her rotted turnip for a brain that Liz and Dave had taken in a legal renter. Renting out rooms was strictly against HOA policy. They had not rented out a room. Liz's elderly mother had moved in with them after breaking her hip and being unable to live alone anymore. Joan sent them a very threatening letter about their unlawful renter and how fines would accrue if the unlawful renter did not vacate immediately. It was accompanied with a copy of that part of the bylaws and pictures of Liz's elderly mother taken through windows of their house. Creep alert! They wrote back that there was no renter and explained the situation. Joanne did not believe that story and had the HOA lawyer start sending them certified letters about their continued violations with ever increasing insane fines. This went over poorly. Liz and Dave got their own lawyer to fire back at a cease and desist letter. After many increasingly aggressive back and forths, it all culminated in an association meeting where Liz, Dave and Liz's mother came in with ID and birth certificates and basically made Joanne look like the pimple on the backside of humanity she was. They won, but Joanne was furious and swore she would get them for something. Joanne maintained until the day I left for college, last I knew of her, that Liz and Dave had forged those driver's licenses and birth certificates to keep their unlawful renter. Cut to the following fall, Liz and Dave needed to repaint the house after making some siding repairs post-hurricane. They carefully checked the bylaws for approved paint colors and picked out a fairly bland shade of something between brown and tan. They gave the painters the color info listed in the bylaws to the painters, and painting happened. Less than a week after their house was painted, they got another certified letter from the HOA lawyer stating their house was the wrong color. They fired back evidence. They ordered exactly what was in the bylaws. Well, after many back and forths, it turned out the approved color and the swatches on file with the board no longer matched because the manufacturer had changed the colors in their line slightly due to some kind of formula change. Their house was a few shades darker than it should have been. See, the bylaws listed the manufacturer color info for convenience, but the shades actually had to match the official swatches. You could have theoretically borrowed from the board and gotten color matched. Nobody ever did that, but Joan was out for blood after the unlawful renter and forced them to have to repaint. Liz and Dave were taking no chances on the second try. They got the swatch set from the HOA, and for some reason it made no distinction between approved accent colors, most houses in the neighborhood had brightly colored doors, or house colors. They decided that if they had to paint their house a second time, Joanne, the dog that caught the car, could live next to the most garish option they had. It was pumpkin orange. The painters asked multiple times if they were sure. They were very sure. You could not see the orange from inside, but you sure could from next door. Joanne made many attempts to object to this, but it was within the letter of the HOA rules, and the house stayed orange until long after I moved away. And guys, if you have watched until here, I would really appreciate it if you could post some star emojis in the comments and maybe even also like the video, which would make me extremely happy. In addition, please give me some feedback in the comments about what you think in regards to reading r/Ask Reddit on YouTube. I know the stories on Ask Reddit are a little bit different and there's not always a really nice solution to the problem or to the story, but I think it is really nice to have some variety. Anyway, the next one goes like this. I lived next door to an Airbnb house. At first it was fine, but then during tourist season, the house was rented out to some dude that decided to invite all his boys over for a lovely party on a Tuesday till after midnight in the pool next to my bedroom window and blocked our driveway with their cars. We spent the next 6 months calling the police, non-emergency line, for one thing or another as a barrage of events unfolded. Other fun mentionable tables were loud pool parties till 2 or 3 in the morning, goth metal music blaring from a stereo that made our windows shake on that side of the house, garbage left sprawled on our yard, cars parked in our driveway when theirs was full. I eventually contacted the owners through the Airbnb listing and explained that if they couldn't find tenants that could respect the residential area, that I would be happy to talk to the HOA about putting in an ordinance against short-term rentals for our area. Needless to say, after 6 months of BS, they put the house up for sale and we finally had a nice neighbor that moved in. Peace at last. And the next one goes like this. I have posted this before, a little backstory for context later. I live in a very spacious country subdivision. We are about 25 years younger than the average owners. Everyone has at least an acre. My husband and I personally built a large shed next to a detached bed garage. It took us about 3 weekends to do it. We also mow our lawn once a week. Our yard is not meticulous but hardly neglected. We got a letter in the mail one day. It was typed on a typewriter and came from the Upper Smith neighbor group, name changed. The letter read,
When you first moved in, I wasn't sure if you had the class, finances or breeding to be in our illustrious neighborhood. I see that you finally built a place to hide all the junk you insist on keeping in your yard. Now, if only you could do something about that hayfield you call a yard.
The junk they were upset about was building materials for the shed that were delivered, used and cleaning up in 3 weeks. I was so mad and revenge was first on my mind for weeks. I couldn't figure out how to handle it to my satisfaction. I figured it out right before the 4th of July. I got 2 old toilets and put one on either side of my driveway by the street. I planted red, white and blue flowers in the bowl and stuck in a couple of small American flags for flair. Then made a large sign that read, "Thank you Upper Smith neighbor group for your letter suggesting I take more pride in my yard." I kept them for a whole year, switching out the bold decorations for every holiday with the wackiest decorations I could find. And the next one goes like this. My boyfriend and I had a next door neighbor around our age who we thought seemed alright. Laid back professional, rented the house with his girlfriend, smoked a ton of drugs, nothing really noteworthy. His girlfriend eventually left him and we watched the dude slowly lose his mind after that. After a series of episodes of his screaming arguments on the phone or when his ex would stop by, we eventually saw it peak when he took a hammer to his cabinets. Our bedroom window had a direct view of his balcony and kitchen window. I was falling asleep when I started hearing a repetitive banging sound and looked out the window to see his perfectly lit kitchen window. In the window was our neighbor just smashing the ever-loving crap out of his kitchen cabinets. I know the landlord just renovated and those cabinets were brand new. He was demolishing his damn kitchen while screaming and laughing, and we could see everything from the comfort of our own bed. He was not able to see us and I remember being frozen while witnessing this man just unhinged from reality like that. I grabbed my boyfriend as a witness to the event and the neighbor eventually calmed down and left the kitchen from our view. I don't think I slept much that night. The property manager saw us outside a few weeks later and told us that he moved. Then she told me she thinks the rental is cursed because it is broken up the last 3 couples she moved in. And the next one, my current neighbor loves to pick fights with all the neighbors. She lives in the cul-de-sac of my street. Instead of coming to us directly about issues she has, she speed dials the city, so she had an issue with a tree in our backyard. A small branch fell onto her lawn from my tree during an ice storm a year ago and decided to wage war on all the trees near her property. So she called the city to make us cut the tree down. It was completely healthy, just leaning over her property slightly. The city sided with her. It had to come down. We had 3 weeks to get it down or we get fined. So we call a place that can do it with a crane as long as the machine can go on her front lawn. You can see where this is going. My mother goes to her, explains that the crane needs to go on her lawn to get the tree she wanted down. She replies that is fine and
anything she can do to help.
And then, the day off, the arborists are ready to cut her down and she decides she is no longer okay with the vehicle being on her lawn. So not only does the process get delayed 3 days, pushing us close to the deadline, we have to get a bigger crane to do it from the cul-de-sac. This one decision of hers cost an extra $6,000, which came out of my pocket. My parents are retired and old and deferred my education over a year. And the next one, growing up, we had a neighbor named Ada. She was a widow and had a big dog. I think it was a St. Bernard. We were told when we moved in that her dog was mean and had attacked some kids. Her backyard was fenced with a wooden fence and the dog was kept in a chain link pen inside that fence when it wasn't in the house. Our houses were separated by an alley and our yard was sunk in a bit and had a stone wall on the outside perimeter. We would often play in our yard and that would make the dog bark. We never did anything to irritate that dog on purpose. We were terrified of it. If we were outside playing, she would yell at us about making the dog bark. One day my mom and I were at the mall. My dad and brother were home on our porch. Ada was walking to dog from her back door to the pen in the yard. The dog got loose, ran across the alley, across our driveway, jumped on my brother's back, he was 5 years old, and attacked him. All hell broke loose. Thankfully, my dad was able to intervene before things got bad and my brother did not even end up at the hospital. However, my dad lost it a bit. He was sure the dog would get loose again, so he brought his gun down from upstairs and made it more accessible. A few days later, the dog got loose again and he went out and threatened to shoot the dog. A few days later, my parents got served. They had to go before the magistrate. They needed a lawyer for this and at the time was dad either on strike or laid off, so money was tight. My dad's brother-in-law agreed to be their lawyer and they rounded up a few neighbors that the dog had attacked through the years. They went to court twice and the neighbor didn't show up either time. After that, the case was dropped. Eventually the dog died and she didn't get another one, but we never had any real contact with Ada until years later when one of their trees, a huge old pine, was blown over by the wind. It blocked the road and ended up in her driveway. Her garage was a separate building behind her house, just missing her garage. They actually dealt with each other cordially then. Fun times. And guys, unfortunately, we have already reached the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and if you haven't already, please also go to patreon.com/ripeyoutube, where I upload exclusive Reddit videos starting at just $3 a month. This is a great way to support me in case you are interested, and the chance for me to become independent from YouTube revenue. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe and like the video, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.